Live Radio with John Girardi on Power Talk 96.7 and AM 1400. Here's your host, John Girardi.
The boys are back in town. We have so much to talk about. We could have this show extend to a third hour. Right to Life Radio, John Girardi here, and finally back from his various forays to Washington, D.C., where he was standing outside of the Supreme Court as the Supreme Court justices were hearing the oral arguments in the Dobbs case, the big case to potentially overturn Roe v. Wade. Finally back. Boy, are his arms tired.
That's right.
From all that flying. Mr. Jonathan Keller from California Family Council. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, great to be here. And yes, I was there, but I want to just point out for anyone who's listening, I did get on a plane at, or I should say I got up. I got up at 6 a.m. Eastern time on Friday the 3rd.
So 3 a.m. Western time.
3 a.m. West Coast time, just so that I could fly back in time for your phenomenal fundraiser.
There you go, for the Right to Life Essential California Christmas Dinner and Auction. Yes, Jonathan traveled the farthest of anyone that day to make it to the Christmas auction, which was, by the way, a great success and a wonderful time.
I was joking with all my Family Policy Council counterparts that I was feeling jet-lagged, and I said, this is what I get for trying to plan two events on opposite coasts for the same 24-hour period.
Yes, that's basically what happened. So,
but it was a great event. I really enjoyed it. It was a little smaller, but honestly, the fact that you were able to walk around without being smushed between silent
people.
Auction items and crowds of people.
We had to kind of limit it a little bit for COVID restrictions. Of if we had over 1,000, then we would have had to have a vaccine card check for everyone, and that's not super fun. So anyway, it was a great time. All right, Jonathan. We need to get down to brass tacks here. There's a lot to discuss. I'm not sure if we'll get to it this week or next week for discussing California becoming a sanctuary state for abortion.
Oh, don't even get me started.
But at the very we have not had you here to discuss the Dobbs case, and I think the best shows are when I can, instead of just me lecturing for 40 minutes. Although that's basically the entire content of the John Girardi show is me, lecturing for 40 minutes. I
like listening to those every now and then.
Yeah, I do too. Well, I mean, when I actually listen to myself, which is a weird experience.
We're married with kids at home. When else do we get to hear ourselves talk for 40 uninterrupted minutes?
Exactly, yeah. So we haven't had the opportunity to sit down together and talk about the Dobbs case at length. So let's do it now. So, Jonathan, you were outside the Supreme Court listening to it. I was several thousand miles away listening to it at the same time, and it's not like you got any extra insight from being outside the building at the time.
In fact, true confession, just because of how crazy the week was and everything out there, I have not heard the entire oral argument start to finish. I've heard a lot of clips, but when I was out there, they tried to play some of it over the loudspeakers, and John, you may be surprised to hear that it was difficult to hear over the bullhorns and chants.
Well, sure. Yeah, probably both sides, bullhorns and chants.
Our good friend Teresa Bukovinak, yes, she and her group, the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, had a drum circle with large 5-gallon buckets. They were going over to...
I don't think Teresa goes anywhere without her bullhorn.
That's right.
I think that's kind of attached. She's attached to the... to it at the hip.
Yes, and we love you, Teresa, if you're listening. So.
Yes, we do. And it's not a criticism.
No.
Yeah, good for you.
It's a feature, not a bug.
It's a feature, not a bug, exactly. So let's talk about the Dobbs case. So I left the Dobbs case, sort of my review of, I read the transcript more so than listened to it. I left it feeling really good.
Mm-hmm.
Better than I felt beforehand, where beforehand I had this sinking feeling that we would get some question from Kavanaugh, some question from the chief that would just make my heart sink and think, oh my gosh, 48 years of pro-life activism is all going down the toilet right here, right now. The Federalist Society is going to have to go out of business. Like this is terrible. And it turned out that was not really what it was. Actually, the question now, here's the thing. You can't really 100% read the tea leaves of what questions the justices are asking and then draw a straight line conclusion to how they will rule in June. I'm sure the justices kind of know already how they're going to rule. I'm sure they have been thinking about this case for their entire lives as federal judges.
I think 8 of the 9 justices know how they're going to rule, but, Chief Justice Roberts, don't put it past him to begin writing an opinion and then make a very circuitous change to that opinion.
Well, sure. It's not to say that someone's mind can't be changed. And at some point we're going to have story time talking about how this isn't over by giving story time about how Anthony Kennedy got his mind changed with Planned Parenthood versus Casey. But based on the way that those questions were asked, I feel really good about Justice Kavanaugh.
Yep.
In particular.
And Justice Barrett.
Well, and Justice Barrett, but I was never as worried about Justice Barrett as I think some people. I think some people would have been. Some people on the right have been a little disappointed in Justice Barrett that she hasn't been as conservative on certain other issues. I've never been worried about her on the Dobbs case. I just find it. I cannot imagine that Justice Barrett would be, on the Supreme Court and not eager to overturn Roe v. Wade, just from my experience of it. Anyway, but I was worried about Kavanaugh. So let's talk about the specific kinds of questions that Brett Kavanaugh asked. And the questions he was asking were about stare decisis. And I think a lot of people were worried about Kavanaugh and an abortion case and stare decisis. Because basically when Senator Collins from Maine, when she voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, and Susan Collins from Maine is a pro-choice Republican. And remember, at that time, the Senate was divided 51 Republicans to 49 Democrats. It was really razor thin whether Kavanaugh was going to get confirmed. Kavanaugh went through this brutal confirmation process where he was accused of sexual assault. I don't know. I did not personally think that the evidence was sufficient to derail his nomination.
And to her credit, even though we disagree with her vehemently on the abortion issue, Senator Collins did give a very passionate and convincing speech. She didn't just say, all right, I'm voting for Kavanaugh. She gave a 45-minute speech about the importance of due process and accusations and yada, yada, yada.
Right. But, however, one of the features of her speech, of Senator Collins' speech, saying that she was going to vote for Brett Kavanaugh, which was the clincher, basically, because she voted for him, that gave Joe Manchin cover to vote for him. So Kavanaugh wound up, getting a majority to vote for his confirmation. A big chunk of Senator Collins' speech was her belief that that Kavanaugh would not overturn Roe v. Wade. Her belief that Kavanaugh had made commitments to her about respecting precedent and stare decisis, that to her mind, she was convinced he was not going to overturn Roe. And basically, in order for any of us to feel good about the Kavanaugh nomination, any of us pro-lifers, we would have to say, well, Kavanaugh was wrong, Collins is wrong about what Kavanaugh actually thinks about stare decisis and how it would apply. We on the outside who have not had a personal conversation with Susan Collins have to think that we are right and Susan Collins was wrong. Now, related to that is an interesting piece in National Review written by Ramesh Ponnuru. And by the way, just to explain lingo, stare decisis is a Latin phrase that means to stand with decided matters. Jonathan and I often joke that stare decisis, as liberals view it, is a Latin phrase that means abortion should be legal forever. Because the phrase is only really brought up when a Republican nominates someone to the Supreme Court and you get Dianne Feinstein or somebody, to stand up there and ask them questions in the judiciary hearings for their confirmation and ask them, do you respect stare decisis? And the Republican appointee sits there and has to say, yes, I respect stare decisis. Is Roe v. Wade a precedent of this court that you will respect? And the nominee has to say, Roe v. Wade is a precedent of this court. It has been upheld many times. I will give it the deference that any precedent of the court has to receive. And then Feinstein will make an ass of herself and say something like, is it a super precedent of the court? which is not a thing. That's not an actual legal term. It's what is it, a super duper precedent? Is it a super duper double secret precedent? So I want to go through this little piece from Ramesh Ponnuru from National Review about what Justice Kavanaugh actually told Senator Collins. We're hearing a lot, and we are going to hear more, to the effect that Justice Kavanaugh got on the Supreme Court by assuring Senator Collins that he would respect Roe v. Wade as a precedent, and that voting to overturn it would mean that he had lied to her. That's the narrative around Kavanaugh, especially after his comments, his questions in the Dobbs case. It sounded like he was talking about stare decisis as a lot of big important cases of the court have been the result of overturning past bad precedents. Anyway.
And John, I just have to point out, it's funny, when there's the hint, even though this hasn't happened yet, there's the hint that maybe a Republican-appointed justice might rule in a way that is slightly more conservative, maybe, than it seemed perhaps in their confirmation hearing.
He lied. He betrayed them.
It's a stab in the back to whoever. Yeah. Whereas if it is a conservative justice who rules in a much more liberal way, they evolved in office.
Yeah. Anthony Kennedy.
David Souter.
Anthony Kennedy, who flat out told Ronald Reagan that he wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade, and then got the opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade, and did not overturn Roe v. Wade. Anyway. Anyway, the Washington Post, Ponnuru writes, already ran a story making this case that Kavanaugh may have lied to Susan Collins about upholding Roe back in September. So Ponnuru continues, let's check the tape. We are relying on Senator Collins' description of the conversation, but it's notable that she has never said, quote, Kavanaugh promised me that he would not vote to overrule Roe, or anything similar. He didn't, that is, make the kind of firm commitment to rule in a particular way in a possible future case that most legal analysts would consider grossly improper. Collins herself said that Kavanaugh had not made such a commitment. Here's what Collins has said, according to the Post. This is a quote from Collins. As the judge asserted to me, a long-established precedent is not something to be trimmed, narrowed, discarded, or overlooked, Collins said. Its roots in the Constitution give the concept of stare decisis greater weight simply because a judge might want to on a whim. In short, his views on honoring precedent would preclude attempts to do by stealth that which one has committed not to do overtly. And here's Politico's account. We talked about, this is Collins talking with reporters, we talked about whether he considered Roe to be settled law, Collins told reporters. He said that he agreed with what Justice Roberts said at his nomination hearing, in which he said that it was settled law. What Roberts said at his hearing was that Roe was a precedent of the Supreme Court entitled to respect as such, quote, like any other precedent of the court. Obviously, Roberts did not deny that precedents can ever be overruled, and he specifically avoided declaring that he would vote to reaffirm Roe and Casey, as several senators were pressing him to do. So the point that Ponnuru is making is pretty simple, that Brett Kavanaugh, who seems very much inclined towards arguments that stare decisis does not require him to uphold Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and the framing of all of his arguments were just listing all of the significant landmark Supreme Court cases where the court overruled a prior decision. That basically, he's not lying to Susan. This was not a lie to Susan Collins. And I think it's disingenuous, based on everything she said about their interactions, it's disingenuous to say that, Kavanaugh is lying here. All right. We'll have more on this. I could talk about Dobbs for about 2 hours, and at least we'll do so for 1 hour. More on that next on Right to Life Radio, right here on Power Talk. We've been talking about the Dobbs case, and I want to go down memory lane just a little bit here. It's story time. It's Supreme Court story time. About the kinds of pressure that Supreme Court justices are going to face between now and the actual decision they're going to render in the Dobbs case. As you know, Dobbs is the big case. This is the case, the opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade. That's the question before the court. It's clear to me that the 6 justices in the majority know that Roe is bad law and should be overturned. It's just a question of whether they are going to be convinced by lame arguments of stare decisis. And this leads me to a story about Anthony Kennedy. Anthony Kennedy got on the Supreme Court. In no small part, he told Ronald Reagan, when he was being vetted for the spot, he told Reagan, I intend to overturn Roe v. Wade. He volunteered that to Reagan. Okay? He was Reagan's like third choice for this gig. He told Reagan, I intend to overturn Roe v. Wade. He gets on the court. He gets the case to overturn Roe v. Wade, which was Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which was decided in 1992. And he initially, I think in the initial conference they have after oral arguments, they give their initial sense of the case. The justices all meet together, the 9 of them together. They give their initial sense and how they sort of intend to rule. They haven't written out their opinions or anything yet, but they sort of talk about, okay, how do I intend to rule? Who's on which side? Who's on the other side? And then they sort of like assign, all right, well, we're going to write an opinion on it, blah, 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 blah. Kennedy, I think, initially was going to rule to overturn Roe. And he had one law clerk, who I think is now a professor at the University of Virginia Law School. And the Supreme Court law clerks are superstar, hotshot young lawyers who are on to, great things.
They're hip and with it to all the latest arguments of the times, percolating in those ivory towers.
Exactly. And most of them were superstars in law school. They're on their way to being superstars in pretty much every existing Supreme Court justice was him or herself a former Supreme Court clerk.
If you clerk for a Supreme Court justice, it's like the legal world is your oyster.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So he had this one clerk who basically was able to get to him and said to him, you can't overturn Roe v. Wade. Think about the impact this would have. You absolutely can't. And had all these arguments for him about why he can't. Kennedy then let this one clerk kind of segregate himself out and just write his portion of what became the controlling plurality opinion in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which upheld Roe v. Wade. And Scalia learned that Kennedy had changed his vote and was so upset that he actually drove to Kennedy's house and begged him to change his mind, and Kennedy wouldn't do it. And I was told this story by Professor Carter Snead, who has told this story in other public fora, so I don't feel bad saying it. And Professor Snead concluded the story by saying, and Kennedy wouldn't change his mind because he is a vain, stupid man. And I have never heard Professor Snead say anything mean about anybody ever.
Wow.
And so it kind of had, it's like one of those really nice people that if they say something mean, it's like, oh, this must be really bad. Actually owed. This person actually deserves that title. So ever since, I've felt free in thinking of and talking about Anthony Kennedy as if he is a vain, stupid man. Why am I telling that story? I'm telling that story just to tell you I don't think this is quite over. I think the initial review is that there are easily 5 and probably 6 votes on the court to overturn Roe v. Wade. However, the kind of pressure that Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts, I think in particular, will feel. I don't think Sam Alito cares about this stuff. I don't think Neil Gorsuch cares about this stuff. I certainly know Clarence Thomas doesn't care about this stuff, and I think Amy Barrett maybe doesn't care about this stuff as much either.
Clarence Thomas, I just have to say,
he just DGAF, DNGAF, as the kids say.
Yes, and
he does
again,
not GAF.
If family friendly, because I know some people might listen to this.
He does not give a flip.
Yes, yeah. His approach to intimidation after the confirmation battle he faced seems to be. Screw around and find out.
Yeah, F around and see what happens. Yeah, yes. He does not care. He does not care if he's never invited back to Yale Law School. He hates Yale Law School. He went to Yale Law School. He's a graduate there. He hates Yale. He does not care if he doesn't get invited back to Harvard. He doesn't care. He's probably going to retire in a next Republican president that gets elected. He'll probably retire.
Please stay alive for at least 3 more years, Justice Thomas.
Get on a treadmill, Justice Thomas. Good Lord. So he doesn't care. But here's the thing. If Roberts is part of a majority to overrule Roe v. Wade, will he ever get invited to Harvard Law School again to give a speech? I mean, the faculty will protest him. Not just the students. The faculty will protest him. If Brett Kavanaugh does that, the faculty and the staff, the faculty and the students will protest him ever giving a speech at Yale again. John Roberts likes being, respected in legal academia. He likes being liked. He likes being appreciated.
To quote Michael Scott, I don't like to be liked, but I need to be liked.
I need to be liked. Exactly. So the kind of maybe that kind of pressure isn't as much as, I have a job and I'm going to get fired or something. I can't go to parties. What a horrible amount of pressure. But there's a lot of pressure on those guys, so keep praying for them. All right, we'll have more and different aspects of the Dobbs case, maybe just a sort of basic explanation of stuff, like who are the parties in Dobbs, next on Right to Life Radio. Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much. Okay, Jonathan.
All right.
I want to talk about a sort of a grab bag of different things about Dobbs. Maybe explain the basics of it and talk about different little controversies and arguments. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, because my parents mentioned this, and this is the thing where I'm so in the weeds of this lawyer stuff that I don't realize when my parents were saying, we really liked your show talking about the Dobbs case for one of my John Girardi shows or something. And they were like, but who is Dobbs? And what is Jackson Women's Health? Okay, so often the names of the parties in a Supreme Court case aren't as important as the actual legal issues being decided, and sometimes I don't even fully remember who the names represent. So Dobbs is the last name of a public health official in the state of Mississippi who I think was sued initially at the start of this lawsuit. Okay, so let's remember the origin of Dobbs. The state of Mississippi passed a law to ban abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. This clearly violates the terms of Planned Parenthood versus Casey and Roe v. Wade. So abortion providers, Jackson Women's Health Organization is an abortion provider. They sued a bunch of plaintiffs from the state of Mississippi, including Dobbs. I believe his name was Thomas Dobbs. I can look up one of the briefs, Jonathan, for the case, and you'll see the name right there. So the state of Mississippi sued. So these abortion providers in Mississippi sued Dobbs and a number of other officials in Mississippi to say that this new law is unconstitutional and we need to impose this new law banning abortion is unconstitutional. We need to impose, an injunction from the court to prevent Mr. Dobbs or any other official in Mississippi from enforcing this law. Okay, so that's who Dobbs is. Dobbs is the name of he's a public health official in the state of Mississippi. All right, Jackson Women's Health Organization is an abortion provider. Those are the two sides. And that's the thing with any Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court cases aren't just the court giving their opinions on stuff. It's an actual lawsuit. There's an actual lawsuit that made its way all the way up. It was decided first at the district court, which is the first court, then at the federal appellate court, which is the second tier right below the Supreme Court, and then it gets to the Supreme Court. Okay. So, first of all, that's who Dobbs is. All right. I now want to get to an interesting question about the two options that are sort of presented to us and why I sort of wish there was a third option. Okay. The way that overturning Roe is often presented is it's presented to us as, if you overturn Roe, it turns the question over to the states, which is kind of correct. I say kind of because it's not fully correct. Okay. Basically, the conventional way in which we all have sort of assumed that Roe v. Wade would be overturned was through a decision in which the court says, the Constitution has nothing to say about abortion. Everyone can regulate abortion however they want. And so people then say, so it turns it over to the states. Well, kind of, but also kind of not. So it turns it over to the legislatures. That can mean the U.S. Congress, and that can also mean the state legislatures. Okay, so it doesn't just turn it over to the states. Congress now also has broader latitude to regulate abortion in various ways because it is also a legislature. The problem of Roe v. Wade and Roe v. Wade, Doe versus Bolton, Planned Parenthood versus Casey is that they purported to be interpreting the Constitution. Okay, they said the 14th Amendment has this hidden protections buried somewhere in it, emanations from penumbras, that says that abortion is a constitutionally protected right. And if something's protected by the Constitution, you can't just pass a normal law to gainsay it, okay? The First Amendment protects the right to free exercise of religion. State of California can't just pass a law banning the Presbyterian Church. I always do that example. I apologize to all you Presbyterians out there, but
Julia's parents,
sorry,
shouting, "Hey!"
sorry to the wrongs, but so if the Constitution protects something, you can't just pass a normal law to gainsay what the Constitution says. What the Supreme Court did was interpret the Constitution as saying something that we believe it never said. Okay, so if Roe gets overturned, it turns the question over not just to state legislatures, but also to the U.S. Congress. As we can see, the Democrats understand that really well. Okay, just a few months ago, we talked about it on this show. Democrats passed the Women's Health Protection Act. The Women's Health Protection Act, Women's Health Care Protection Act. I forget the name exactly.
Yeah.
So this was a big law where the Democrats were basically trying to say all the stuff that Roe v. Wade required, they wanted to make it a federal law rather than something that's protected by the Constitution itself. Just make it a normal federal law. And that way, even if Roe v. Wade got overturned, mandated legal abortion nationwide, and that's important because if it's a federal law, it would supersede all the individual state laws. Mandated nationwide legal abortion for all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason. They were trying to pass that as a normal federal law. Now, it passed the House. I don't think it's got a snowball's chance in, passing the Senate because it's certainly subject to the filibuster, and Democrats don't have the votes to eliminate the filibuster. And even if Susan Collins supports it, which she said she did, which I find abhorrent.
Theoretically, you could have Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski support it.
Sure. But even then, they're not going to support getting rid of the filibuster. And I don't think Joe Manchin wants to get rid of the filibuster. I don't know that Manchin would even vote for that bill. So anyway, it's not going to happen. But the Democrats have sort of grasped the enormity, I think better than Republicans. Democrats have grasped the enormity of abortion and what overturning Roe means as far as turning it over to legislatures. Not just state legislatures, but also Congress. And they want to, they're trying, they don't have enough power in Congress right now, but they're trying to leverage what little power they have right now to try to do something to mandate legal abortion right now, just given the looming threat of Roe being overturned and maybe 24 states moving to limit abortion as soon as that happens. Democrats don't want those 24 states to limit abortion.
I've heard as high as 26. At least that's what everybody...
is that the number that people are saying? Okay, I saw 24, but whatever.
All the reporters that I was talking to on the phone earlier this week said, 26 states. And I think, John, the reason they're going with 26 is because it's more
larger than
half.
24. Yeah, and more than half.
Oh, more than half the states in the country.
Are going to move to, limit abortion. Good. Should be more than that. Anyway. So... this leads me to this conclusion. I think a lot of Republicans get some peccadillos about trying to pass certain kinds of things through federal legislation. And they have a kind of reticence to do this because of idealism about the original structure of the Constitution and the original scope of what's called the Interstate Commerce Clause. Okay, the Interstate Commerce Clause is a part of the Constitution that gives the federal government the ability to regulate commerce between the various states. All right. This phrase of the Constitution, and what it means, was wildly expanded. Geez, I'm talking like a Southerner. Was wildly expanded. The definition of what constitutes interstate commerce was wildly expanded during the 1930s through a series of Supreme Court decisions that wound up okaying various aspects of FDR's New Deal. It gave the federal government broad power to regulate almost anything in American life because you could just tangentially connect almost anything as impacting commerce between the states. There's a famous case in which a single farmer in Kansas who grows his wheat in Kansas, sells his wheat to someone in Kansas, does all of this stuff just in Kansas, and the federal government was deemed to be able to regulate that because in the aggregate, transactions like that can impact markets for agriculture that transcend state lines, okay, which is a big expansion of what interstate commerce means. So there are a number of Republicans who think of certain kinds of things as being inappropriate to be regulated by Congress because they have this I think, kind of a romantic notion because it's so far disconnected from the road we've gone down for the last 80 years, 90 years almost of American governance. They have this romantic notion of wanting to return to a pre-1937 idea of what interstate commerce means and limiting the ability of the federal government to regulate all this stuff. But here's what I'm saying. If we're going to let our little peccadillos, when, by the way, Republicans regulate all kinds of things, are okay with regulating all kinds of things using interstate commerce as an excuse for doing it. If we're going to get scrupulous about trying to utilize the power of the federal government to ban abortion through national legislation, when our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle are more than happy to try to mandate legal abortion using the power of the federal government, then that is idiotic. That is trying to bring a knife to a gunfight. We need to demand that when Republicans next take power, if Roe is overturned, that they introduce legislation on a nationwide basis to ban abortion. When we return, why this relates to the Lincoln-Douglas debates about slavery. Next on Right to Life Radio. Right to Life Radio. Thank you all so much for listening. All right. I want to close by thinking about this. I am hopeful. I think the Supreme Court's going to overturn Roe. I am hopeful that they will.
John, I
will be happy if they do.
You are not alone. Just as a quick note, our favorite liberal legal punching bag, Ian Millhiser.
Mm-hmm.
I just love it so much.
He thinks that it sure sounds like Roe v. Wade is doomed.
That's the title.
What a great title for his piece. So Ian Millhiser, he writes for, who does he write for, Slate?
Now he's with Vox.
Okay, he writes for
Vox.com.
Vox, which is a super left-wing outlet. And Ian Millhiser is a lawyer who writes for them. And he is the king of like panicky left-wing liberal columns about how the Supreme Court is going to destroy, insert your preferred liberal imagined constitutional right, and then the court inevitably, stabs us in the back,
yes.
And Millhiser is proven wrong.
Which is why a couple years ago I remember there was
he's kind of the Chicken Little of legal commentary.
There's a religious liberty case though a few years ago that ADF argued, and I remember walking away from that rally and checking, and he was like, "Wow, well, there was actually some encouraging questions from Gorsuch," and I was like, "Oh no,
yeah." Exactly.
So, but in this case,
anyway,
yes, it is. Right. The title literally says it sure sounds like Roe v. Wade is doomed.
Yes, and if the court overturns Roe v. Wade in the manner that I'm sure they will, if they overturn Roe v. Wade, it will be by saying the Constitution has nothing to say about abortion, ergo states can regulate abortion however they want. That will be much better than our current situation. Our current situation is constitutionally mandated legal abortion for all 9 months of pregnancy for the whole country for any reason. This will be enormously better. Letting 24 states outlaw abortion is an enormous improvement. However, there are several people making arguments, and chief among them were John Finnis, one of my professors at Notre Dame Law School, and I'll add, maybe one of the most important English language legal philosophers in the world. John Finnis, Robert George, former student of Finnis. Finnis was also Gorsuch's former professor in doctoral dissertation when Gorsuch was a grad student at Oxford, getting his PhD, or his DPhil, and Josh Craddock, who's Harvard Law grad, smart guy. They have all made the argument that the Constitution itself in the 14th Amendment, as originally understood, should be interpreted as protecting the right to life of unborn children, and that, in fact, we should mandate as a protection of the Constitution itself that abortion be illegal for all 50 states. Okay? Now, there are a lot of sort of legal conservatives, chief among them, I would say, at least as far as the public banner, Ed Whalen is sort of the key person sort of arguing for this from National Review, who's a very good guy and very sincerely pro-life. I'm not trying to knock him or anything, though I disagree with him. And he has basically said, well, there's no support on the court for trying to strike down, to say that abortion is banned by the Constitution. There's no support for that on the court, which is a little ironic because he was intimately involved in the Trump administration in helping pick and vet several of the people who are now on the Supreme Court. So for him to say, well, there's no support for that on the court. Well, okay, none of my friends who got on the Supreme Court would agree with that. None of my friends that I recommended be on the Supreme Court would agree with it. Okay, well, yeah, that's a little self-serving. Anyway, I fear this. The unsatisfying part of the Lincoln-Douglas debates was Douglas. Douglas basically taking the mindset that every state should just kind of decide for itself whether or not slavery should be legal or not. And the moral arguments, the ethical arguments, and legal arguments that Lincoln made, that slavery should be illegal everywhere, I think were by far the more compelling and the ones that we believe are right. And I can't get past the idea, and Pat Smith has written about this, a couple of other legal commentators have written about this, I can't get past the idea that if we just say every state can regulate abortion on its own, we're setting ourselves up for a very divided country. Kind of like in the 1860s. I hope it doesn't come to what happened in the 1860s, but we're going to be pretty dang divided. That'll do it. That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next time on Power Talk.